to the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Hi, I'm Penny Pennington. I'm an alcoholic, and it's great to be here this morning. And want to thank Glenn for asking me to come over and do this. I think one of my sponsees had something to do with getting my name to him, and so, or it might have been Carol, because Carol's our bookie. So I'm just really grateful to be here this morning. I walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in Honolulu, Hawaii on Sunday, October 9th, 1977. And since that time, I've not used or abused alcohol or any other substance that allows me to take a trip without leaving my chair unless I'm on Zoom. And last October, I celebrated 44 years of continuous sobriety in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous.
I don't give a fuck. Keep drinking, bitch.
Thank you, Chris. I think that you might disappear. I don't know if that, when I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, I did not expect to stay sober for 44 years. That was just not my expectation. That did throw me a bit. My home group, my online home group, is the Global Speakers Group. We're out of Beijing, China. It's been my home group for about 7 years. And we meet on, we have 3 meetings a week on Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays. Speaker meeting on Sunday, women's meeting on Monday, and a literature discussion on Tuesday. And we're an English speaking meeting, but we're on the WebEx platform, and which is just a little bit different, and we're audio only. We have no video at all. So it's really interesting. And the women's meeting on Mondays has really been just a really important part of my sobriety during the pandemic. It's just really, we started it 2 months before the pandemic started, and we started it because we had a newcomer at one of our meetings, a newcomer woman, and we asked her to stay after, and all of the guys in our regular Sunday meeting got off the meeting, and the women had just a private chat with this woman and reached out to her and did an online 12-step call. And we've seen them during Zoom. This was prior to the pandemic, and after we talked with this woman, and she has come back to the meeting. She's not a regular there. She has access to meetings in Beijing. But after we did this, the women in this group were talking to me, so we decided we've got a platform, let's just use it. And we decided to start this women's meeting. So we just celebrated 2 years in January, and it's really very recovery focused, very literature focused. It's a really great group. And if anybody's interested, I'll put my contact info in the chat afterwards. And I have a sponsor. I've had this sponsor for more than half of my sobriety. I did make the mistake when I asked her if she would sponsor me. I did make the mistake of telling her that I was low maintenance. And I am just amazed that she did not run for the hills, because between me and some of her other also not low maintenance sponsees, she has really had her hands full. But I'm just so grateful to have trudged this path with this woman for all these years. I talk to her every Thursday morning. She is quite elderly now and not always present, but I do have other women that I talk to. And it just has enhanced my sobriety. And I'm so grateful that I do talk to her at least once a week, that she's always got the backstory. She knows what's going on, and I know what's going on for her. So those are just important things that I like to talk about when I first get started, because it gets me into what's going on and what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And I want to read real briefly from a story in the back of the book. And when I was getting sober, I was told that I don't know the whole story unless I've read the whole story. So I was taught not to just read one paragraph from a story when I'm reading it. Of course, in a meeting, I only read a paragraph or two. But I was taught that if I hear a paragraph in a meeting, that I need to go back and I need to read the whole story, because I need to get the context of where that paragraph is coming from. And this is from page 316 and 317 of the big book, 4th edition. Sobriety is nothing like I thought it would be. At first, it was one big emotional roller coaster full of sharp highs and deep lows. My emotions were new, untested, and I wasn't entirely certain I wanted to deal with them. I cried when I should have been laughing. I laughed when I should have cried. Events I thought were the end of the world turned out to be gifts. It was all very confusing. Slowly, things began to even out. As I began to take the steps of recovery, my role in the pitiful condition of my life became clear. If asked what the two most important things in recovery are, I would have to say willingness and action. I was willing to believe that AA was telling me the truth. I wanted to believe it was true in a way I cannot relate in words. I wanted this thing to work. Then I began to take the course of action prescribed. And I really love this story. There's a couple of other paragraphs that I really like, but what I like about it is that it really tells where I was at when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was one of those women. I grew up around alcohol. There was a lot of alcoholism in my extended family, none in my immediate family growing up, but both my sister and I wound up with the gift of this disease. And I get to celebrate my sobriety date with friends in the program. And my sister, unfortunately, has her sobriety date on her gravestone because she didn't make it to Alcoholics Anonymous. And it took me a long time to forgive her because I was several years sober when my sister passed away from this disease. And her daughter made it to AA, and I'm grateful for that. But the alcoholism in my extended family, several of my cousins are members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, when we get together at family reunions, we have this little, we all kind of wind up in one corner talking. And I was at a family reunion one time, and I went over to get another bottle of water. And one of my aunties said to me, she said, "What's going on over there?" And my cousin Greg said, "Oh, don't worry about them. They're just having their own personal meeting." And, you know, it's just one of those things that what a neat thing that is to have that connection within my family. I started drinking. I didn't drink in high school. I didn't know it would have helped, but I started drinking shortly after high school, and started drinking in a nice cocktail lounge in New York. You know, it was a nice place. I ordered a drink in a stem glass. I don't even know what it was. And it was magic because all of a sudden I felt the way you looked. When I looked at other people, you know, I couldn't figure out how you knew how to do stuff. You somehow, you know, we hear that line all the time that y'all got the directions and I was probably in the bathroom, but it was magic what that drink did for me. And I don't know how much I drank that night, but I do know that I came to laying on the bathroom floor the next morning. I was puking in the toilet, and that's where my drinking started. And that's the kind of drinker I was. I was a puker. I was a blackout drinker. I didn't remember things. I didn't know how I got places. And my drinking started in that nice cocktail lounge in New York. And my drinking took me onto Skid Row, and it didn't take me there right away, but eventually that's where I wound up. And that's where I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, was from drinking on, I was living in the Midwest, and I was in my second marriage. I'd already gone through my first marriage, and I was in my second marriage, and my husband, bless his heart, one evening, I finally made it home. You know, that marriage was in trouble right from the beginning because of my dating habits. You know, I'd go out to drink with friends from work, and, you know, and it sounds innocent enough, you know, oh yeah, let's stop at the bar and have a few. And so we'd stop at the bar, and then they would be going home, and I would think, yeah, I should go home too. And then someone else would come in that I knew, and I would think, oh, well, I'll just have a couple with them. And before I knew it, it was closing time and I wasn't making it home. And my husband was not happy with his new wife. And he suggested that it was probably the people I hung out with. And that sounded that could be accurate to me. It couldn't be anything. It was the people I hung out with. And in order to get me away from the people that I hung out with, he suggested that we relocate from the Midwest and that we go someplace warm. Neither one of us liked cold climates. So we looked at a map of the United States, and I'm not sure why we confined ourselves to the US actually, but we looked at a map of the US, and California has earthquakes, and Florida has hurricanes, and Hawaii has volcanoes, but they're all on one island. So we decided to move to Hawaii, and that's how I got to Hawaii, was because my husband was doing a geographic, not my geographic, his geographic. And so we moved to Hawaii, and it fixed my drinking for a couple of weeks. And then I found the kinds of places I like to drink in. My husband was in the food industry, so I could drink carte blanche at a lot of the nice places in Waikiki. And I could do that for a while, but my behavior got me asked. They asked me not to come back, and which was embarrassing for my husband, embarrassing for me. And so I went to places where he wasn't known, and that's how I got to drinking on Skid Row and on Hotel Street. And I supported my habit the way women who drink in those kinds of places find it necessary to do that. And you know, I was familiar with pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization before I ever read those words in the big book. Restless, irritable, and discontent were running buddies. And I tried all of the things that it talks about in chapter 3. I tried taking a trip, not taking a trip, you know, only drinking at home, never drinking at home, all of the stuff it talks about, except for the natural wines, because when I drank wine, I drank Ripple. And that had never seen a grape. But you know, one of the things that I done was take a more physical exercise, and I joined a softball team. And one Sunday morning, I was a shortstop. I missed an easy field, and my coach pulled me out of the game. And as I walked off the field and walked past him, I asked him if his mother knew who his father was. And I got in my car and I pulled out of Kapiolani Park. And driving home, I kept thinking that if I could get my car going fast enough, I could go over the cliff and I could die. But I hadn't had anything to drink that day. And I hadn't had anything to drink the day before. I hadn't had any of those little outside issues that I'd been using along the way. And I don't know, I am one of those alcoholics that I don't know when I had my last drink of alcohol. What I do know is that I hadn't had anything that day. And so I got home. I was afraid that because I hadn't had anything to drink, that at the last minute I'd pick my foot up off the accelerator and I wouldn't hit the wall hard enough to kill myself. So I went home to fix myself a drink, really, so that I could commit suicide. And I fixed a pitcher of booze, you know, if one is good, a pitcher is better. And I fixed a pitcher of booze. And before I had any of it, I walked to the back of the house and I picked up the phone and I called information and asked for the phone number of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the woman on the phone did not give me the phone number of Alcoholics Anonymous. She connected me with Alcoholics Anonymous. And a woman answered the phone, and which surprised me. It was a Sunday, for God's sakes. Who answers the phone in a business office on a Sunday? And she answered the phone and she said, Alcoholics Anonymous, can I help you? And I said, well, I'd like to know something about your program for a friend of mine that I think might have a problem. And she suggested I might want to take my friend to a meeting. And I said, my friend wouldn't want to do that. But if you could tell me something about Alcoholics Anonymous, I'll tell my friend about it. And she started talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. She mentioned the word God. And I interrupted her and explained to her that I don't believe in God. And she asked if my friend believed in God. So I let her tell me where there was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was a meeting that night. I mean, it's Sunday, folks. I mean, who goes to a meeting on Sunday? Probably the best night to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. But what did I know? And so I don't know why I wrote down the information about that meeting. I really have no idea. But I wrote it down. I got off the phone. I took a shower, which in itself was a miracle at that time. I took a shower And it was like I was on autopilot. I think back to how I got to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's just amazing to me that I got here, that I walked in the door, because I can see all of the places. I go to a meeting on Thursdays that where we're reading the book, Writing the Big Book. And one of the things that we talk about, and it becomes very clear when we study the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, Clancy used to do a talk on this, and he would talk about all of the places we could have lost this. If Bill had not turned around in the Mayflower Hotel, in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, if he had not turned around and gone to the phone and made those phone calls, if Henrietta Seiberling hadn't been home, if Henrietta hadn't introduced Bill and Bob, all of the places we could have lost this. And I think that all of us can probably look at our own stories and see when we were new, all of the places we could have missed the adventure we've been on. There's a meeting in Toddington, England on Saturdays, and that's their theme of their meeting for their speakers is the adventure so far. And I love thinking of my sobriety as this just amazing adventure. And so I wrote down the information. I got my car. I drove there. All of the places I could have stopped at a liquor store on the way. And my first meeting was at the Atkinson YMCA. I crossed the street from Ala Moana Shopping Center. I parked in the parking garage and I went up, and very quietly I went up to the kiosk and I asked the guy, "Where's the AA meeting?" Because I didn't, there's people around and there's this large party going on out on the lanai, and I didn't want anybody to overhear me that I was going to an AA meeting. And he didn't know anything about anonymity, apparently, because he said really loudly, "Oh, the AA meeting, it's in there." And so I went in and the room was empty. And the woman on the phone had told me, "Go up to the first woman you see and tell her you're a newcomer." And I walk into this, well, it's not empty after all. Back by the coffee pots, there's a woman. And I go up to her, and before I can say anything, I start crying. And she says, "Oh, you're a newcomer." And she gets me half a cup of coffee. Newcomers get half a cup of coffee. And she takes me outside to the party on the lanai, and where I thought I should be going. And it turns out that was the meeting before the meeting. And she takes me and she introduces me to some women in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the women in Alcoholics Anonymous give me their phone numbers. And some of the men in Alcoholics Anonymous give me their phone numbers, and the women take them away from me. And I was young and cute in those days. And then they took me in and they sat me down in the front row, in the front row. And I'm crying, and Blanche is on one side of me. She's the coffee maker. And Connie C is on the other side of me. And the meeting starts, and the guy that starts the meeting is a guy named Alan Kay. I don't remember that from my first meeting. I only know that because I actually went back. And Alan starts the meeting, and he starts just the way Glenn started today. Do we have anybody that's new that's counting days that would like to introduce himself? Anybody at their very first meeting? And I didn't consciously raise my hand, but Blanche poked me and my hand went up, and Alan said, "Would you like to introduce yourself?" And I'm crying. No, no, no. And I have cried through 44 years of sobriety. I just cry for different reasons today. And I sat through that first meeting, and it was gibberish. I don't know what they said. I think I saw the steps on the wall at that meeting. I've been back to that meeting since then, so I know that they put the steps on the wall. And so it may just be from other meetings that I remember. But I just remember they were speaking a different language. And I'm just sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, it's come to this. I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous." And I left the meeting that night and I went home, and I didn't go back for a week. I hadn't heard anybody say 90 meetings in 90 days, and no, I didn't get a big book at my first meeting. They maybe offered me a big book at my first meeting, but I didn't get one. I probably picked up some pamphlets because those were free. And if it's free, I have to have it. But I don't know how I got through that week without drinking, except that now I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. So the following Sunday, my husband's still out of town on business. And so I get dressed and I go to the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And I walk in and Blanche is the coffee maker and she knows she's got a commitment, not a convenience. And so I walk over to Blanche and she says, Penny, it's great to see you. I was amazed she remembered my name. And she said, how many meetings did you go to during the week? And I said, oh, I was here on Sunday. And she said, but during the week, Penny, how many meetings did you go to during the week? And I said, well, last Sunday. And she said, no. And she went over to the literature rack and she got a piece of paper out of the literature rack and she was marking some stuff on it. And she took me back outside and she took me over to Connie and Renee. And she said, I've marked meetings where I'm going to meet Penny this week. Would you mark meetings where you'll meet Penny? And Renee marked some meetings and then she handed the paper to Connie and Connie marked some meetings. And I got to tell you, I only went to those meetings to be polite. You know, I thought it would be rude not to show up because they were planning on being there to meet me at those meetings. I didn't know they were going to those meetings anyway. They mark the meetings they go to. And what do we mark when we mark meetings for newcomers? We mark the meetings where we know people are going to reach out to newcomers. We mark the meetings where we know people are going to hear recovery. What do we do now on Zoom? What Zoom numbers, Zoom meetings do we forward to people? Do we send them flyers for? Does Carol get speakers for? The meetings that she knows are going to have a message of recovery. That's what we do because we are so invested in saving the lives of the people that are coming after us. And that's what they did. And, you know, I went to those meetings. I have to tell you, that was 44 years ago. Blanche is living in an assisted living facility up in Washington State now. And I don't get to talk to her anymore, but last September, she celebrated 44 years of sobriety, 30 days more than I have. And Connie C comes to my Tuesday Brooklyn meeting. And we get to talk on the phone fairly regularly. And last August, Connie celebrated 44 years of sobriety, 60 days sober when I got here. And I get to have this life that I have today because of women with 30 and 60 days of sobriety that were doing what their sponsor told them to do. Their sponsors, you see that crazy woman that just walked in the door? Go give her your phone number and tell her what meeting you'll meet her at. And that's what I did. And that's what I continued to do. And I really, you know, I'd love to tell you, I got right into the program and I got right into the book and I just did the steps and got a sponsor. And that's just not my story. You know, I came around, Bill doesn't use the word denial in the big book. He uses the words defiant and delusional. And I was the most defiant, delusional newcomer you can imagine. You know, at the beginning of the meeting, when that paragraph from As Bill Sees It, page 238 in As Bill Sees It was read. Oh my God, I love that page. I'm looking, oh, no, that's not it. I don't know where my As Bill Sees It is, but I love that page because I was one of those people that, you know, I was just, I remember a guy coming up to me one time in a meeting and saying to me, Penny, for God's sakes, get off of the cross. We need the wood. Everything was dramatic. Everything was, you know, the end of the world. Everything was all about me. I had terminal victimitis and I was going to die. And I was going to meetings and I couldn't comprehend anything in the big book, which was really troublesome since I'm an editor and a writer. And to not be able to comprehend what I'm reading was really difficult. I thought the book was poorly written. I thought the language was archaic. My very first copy of the big book has sentences diagrammed because Bill's language was so poor. And I thought that I could help the community of Alcoholics Anonymous if I rewrote the big book for you. And I just, you know, I couldn't read the book. Then one time somebody said, you know, if you can't, oh, my friend Don H. used to say that first 164 pages are the meat of the program, and the stories are the hamburger helper. And if you can't get the meat of the program, go to the hamburger helper. And one night, in a fit again of self-pity, I underlined all of the women's stories in the big book in the 3rd edition, which is what I got sober with. And those were the stories I read. And I'd come home at night and I'd read the stories, and I'd fall asleep reading the big book, reading the women's stories in the back of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I kept coming back, and the only thing I did right was I didn't drink, and I didn't do any of those outside issues. And I finally came to a place where I could no longer resist God's will working in my life. I had people that I used to go to a noon meeting on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at Queens Hospital, and it used to meet in this little conference room in the courtyard, and there were 2 guys that used to go to that meeting, Al and George, and they used to quote from the big book, and they would say things like, well, on page 52 are the bedevilments, and then they'd say something about the bedevilments, and so I'd go home and we didn't have cell phones in those days with an app with the book on it. So I'd go home and I'd grab my big book and I'd look up page 52, and if he hadn't quoted it accurately, I would go back the next day and I would say, when you quoted from the book the other day, that's not really what it says. And then I'd tell him what it really says. And they told me later that they quoted to me from the book to get me to read the book. And then there was, I didn't have a sponsor. I tried sponsorship, and I had a really bad situation with my first sponsor. And so I didn't think anybody could be trusted to be my sponsor. And again, defiant and delusional. And, but there were other women I would call. I had all these phone numbers. We used to get phone numbers on little pieces of paper that people tore out of their checkbooks and out of, the bottoms of pieces of paper, the backs of store receipts. Remember getting those? And we'd have all these clumps of paper in our purse. And so I'd call some of these women when stuff was going on, and I picked a few women that I really liked. They usually gave me an answer that I liked. But this one woman, I kept calling her, and I'm not sure why I kept calling Fran. Fran was sober a long time when I got sober, and I'd call Fran, and Fran would always say to me, I'd tell her what my problem of the day was, and Fran would say things like, boy, Penny, I don't know the answer to that, but I think if you read why don't you try pages 30 to 35 in the big book? I think the answer is in there. And I would read pages 30 to 35, and oh my God, it was perfect. It was just perfect. And then I'd call her another time, and she'd say, oh, pages 62 to 74. And oh my God, it was perfect, just perfect. The exact answer I needed. And every time I called, she'd have these pages for me to read. And I asked Fran one time how she knew the book so well, and she laughed at me and she said, honey, I don't know the book that well, because we didn't study the big book then like we do now. And she said, I don't know the book that well, but I figure you're so selfish and self-centered. I give you 10 to 12 pages to read, you're going to find yourself in there somewhere. And I still find myself in there somewhere. I can tell you, I had to get a new book off the shelf at the beginning of the pandemic, because the one that I was using when the world closed down was falling apart. And every time I'd open it, pages would fly out, and I'm trying to be on my computer and get the pages off the floor. And so I had to grab a new big book off the shelf. But this one is as marked up as the one that I started the pandemic with, because I find myself in this book. And the amazing thing is that this book came off the presses on April 10th, 1939. This last Sunday was the anniversary of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. 83 years ago, the big book came off the presses for the first time. 83 years ago. And I have this book in my hands that is still saving my life all these years later. And the answers are in here for me, because I am a selfish, self-centered alcoholic, because I have character defects, because I need to put those steps and the principles that I learn in those steps into practice in my life. And I just, I'm so grateful for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I left Hawaii when I had a few years sober, and I moved to the East Coast, and they didn't do it right. They didn't read in the right places. They didn't read at all in some places, and they had the secretary's report in the wrong place. And oh my God, and I would go to meetings and I would tell them, I was just there to help. And I would tell them that they're not doing it right. They would say things like, well, we're using the same big book and we're using the same steps. So just keep coming back. And then I started traveling with AA, and I had been taught from the very beginning that when I travel, I do not travel away from Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's what got me involved in online AA for the first time. I got involved in online AA in the mid 1980s, and Alcoholics Anonymous started online. Actually, there were ham radio operators that were doing their version of online AA in the 1950s. There's an article in the Grapevine, I think in 1953 or 54, about ham radio operators, and the Grapevine followed up with that, connecting ham radio operators with each other. So we were always finding ways to connect. And then we got the Loners program. Captain Jack was part of the start of the Loners program. He was on board a ship, and he kept getting in touch with the General Service Office in New York, and they'd put him in touch with port contacts. And we started the Internationalist program, and we started the Loners program. And I used to write to loners before I got involved in online AA. And then I was in a meeting one day, and there's a sign on the bulletin board for online AA. And I'm thinking, I've got a computer. I had a computer at work. It was one of the first IBMs that was put out as a personal computer. And I had a modem that was running at 1200 baud. And anybody who knows anything about electronics knows how slow that was. And a monochrome monitor, you could have it green or orange. Those were your choices. And I had this computer, and I asked one of the guys to show me how to connect with this bulletin board. And I connected with this bulletin board, and I'm talking to people on the East Coast about AA. And it's not like it is today. We didn't have video, we didn't have audio. It was all Post-it stuff, and we're posting messages. And then I'm traveling on business, and we didn't have portables or laptops in those days. I had a luggable. They called it a portable, but it needed a luggage, one of those luggage things to carry it through the airport. And I'm connecting that way. And then I got a dumb terminal that was just devoted to my connection with the BBSs, and I got involved in online AA. And there were people saying, well, online AA isn't real AA. It's not really Alcoholics Anonymous. But we were devoted to, we weren't the typical online groups. We weren't like AOL chat, although there were some recovery rooms on AOL. But we had groups, specific groups, just like you find them on Zoom, that are carrying the message of recovery, talking about the steps, talking about the traditions. And some of us are meeting face to face after only seeing each other online. And I'm so grateful that I got to be a part of that early part of online AA. And when the 4th edition was published, and that paragraph in the foreword to the 4th edition about online AA, and everybody went up in arms. And those of us that were involved in online AA were just thrilled that we got acknowledgement for our part in carrying the message. And that's all we were doing, was trying to carry the message, trying to reach out to people who weren't getting the message any other way. We were reaching out to people who were homebound. We were reaching out to people who were loners. We were reaching out to people that were in a situation that all of us found ourselves in March of 2020, where we're stuck in our homes and we can't get to an AA meeting. And we're trying to carry the message, and that's what we were doing. And the first article about online AA appeared in Grapevine in October of 1986. It's called The Slop Sysop, and it's about It's about a woman that was running a BBS that was an alcoholic and reached out to somebody that was on her board and they started talking about AA, and he 12-stepped her and she got sober. And I'd love to tell you she stayed sober, but she didn't. But it was, again, it's one of the pioneering points, one of the touchstones in Alcoholics Anonymous history, that all of this was going on behind the scenes, so that in March of 2020, when the whole world closed down, it took us, what, a day to get meetings up and running. We already had Zoom meetings running when the world closed down. I had already been in my home group online out of China for 5 years at that point. And I'm so grateful for the online community. I'm so grateful that we rallied around. And I know that there are people that are going back to face-to-face meetings, that are chomping at the bit to get back to face-to-face meetings. And that I'm so grateful for that. I have continued to self-isolate because during this pandemic, a dear friend that I went to college with, but both of us are now sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, is going through chemo. And I'm part of her care team. I'm part of her transport team for chemo and radiation treatments. And in a couple weeks, I get to take her for a CAT scan and see what's happening with the tumor. And because of her health conditions, I have continued to self-isolate. I figure I could do it for 2 years. I can certainly do it for another month for the friendship of this woman and to try and help her save her own life. And so I'm not back to face-to-face meetings yet. And I'm nervous about going back out there in the world. But you know, it's just the message of Alcoholics Anonymous comes through. I'm so grateful for the opportunities all of us have had during the pandemic. I've known of Glenn for years and years because of his recording business. And, you know, and I finally get to be in a meeting with him. I get to meet Carol L., who knows friends of mine got sober with friends of mine in Texas. I get to know Deb and Elizabeth is on here, and other people that, you know, that I've gotten to know around the world. I go to a meeting in Krakow, Poland that I have been to face to face. I get to go to a meeting in Warsaw, Poland that I have been to at Rodna face to face. I get to go to a meeting in Latvia, Toddington, England. And I love I've been to the meeting in the Ukraine, you know. I would love to find out from the woman that was on here from Morella if there are English speaking meetings in Croatia, because I would love to come to a meeting in Croatia online if they're available. I plan on going back just before the pandemic. You know, I got to go to Poland several years ago now. I'm of Polish descent, and I got to go to Poland to do a workshop on the steps and the traditions, and I have dear friends in Poland, and I'm so grateful for them. And I got to go to my grandmother's home village of Oswiecim, which is just outside of Auschwitz, and I got to go to Auschwitz, and that changed my sobriety. That changed my life, going to Auschwitz, seeing the stark reality there, and knowing that I can't call anybody a big book Nazi or a step Nazi or Nazi sponsor, because that's a word of hate. And AA is a program of love. So I've had to take that word out of my vocabulary, and I've had to examine the language that I use. And that's for me. That doesn't have to be for anybody else. That's for me. But I got to go to Moldova. I got to go to Moldova with 3 of my friends in the program. We got to do a steps, traditions, and concepts workshop, and we got to go to prison in Moldova. We got to carry the very first AA meeting into a women's penitentiary in Moldova. Moldova is the poorest country in Europe, maybe not today, but it was then, and has the highest incidence of alcoholism of any country in the world. And we got to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous into that women's penitentiary. And most of those women are in there for crimes that they committed, either drunk or loaded. And it was the very first time AA had been in any penitentiary in Moldova. And it was just, we got to talk to the warden, we got to talk to the staff, we got to talk face to face to the women that were in there. And It was just an amazing experience that I cannot tell you how much I value. I've gotten to go to history meetings. Carol and I often run into each other in a lot of meetings. We run into each other. We have an attraction for the same kinds of meetings, and we got to go. I get to go to a lot of history meetings and learn more about the history of AA and contribute to the history of AA because of my experience with online AA. And yesterday I was telling Glenn just before the meeting started, there's a meeting once a month on the second Tuesday of the month called Grapevine Story Hour. It's out of upstate New York, Area 48. And they do this, they have someone brings a story from the grapevine and then talks about the story. And I took the Slop to Sop, the first article about online AA, to that group yesterday, and then talked about online AA and how it started, and gave them some other information. And oh my God, it was such a great meeting. It was so fun. And I'm so grateful for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I cannot imagine what it would have been like to go through the pandemic without having AA meetings at my fingertips. You know, I've watched online intergroup of Alcoholics Anonymous get started, and you know, they upgraded their meeting schedule just before the pandemic. It was just by chance. And if you're looking for an AA meeting any time of the day or night, go to aa-intergroup.org and go to find a meeting and click on that. And there will be a selection of 20 to 30 to 40 meetings that are starting around the world in the next hour. You can go to a meeting anywhere in the world. And I love that that's at our fingertips. And who could have ever imagined that? Even when the world closed down just 2 years ago, how could we imagine where we are today? And this is not what I thought my life was going to be like. You know, dull, glum, and boring. Who has time for dull, glum, and boring? Pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Yeah, I have challenges in sobriety. Yeah, I have challenges with living, but I've got these great principles, this great book, this great guideline, and people that I know and love that have carried the message to me and that I get to talk to on a regular basis. And I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be here. Glenn, thank you for asking me to do this. And thank you so much, all of you, for being a part of my sobriety today.